evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, viewers all. Whether you are joining us on NTN channel 69, whether you're joining us on Facebook, on one of the Facebook pages, whether it's my Facebook page, the PPPC's Facebook page. Good night to one and all. We're getting started just about 5 minutes behind time today. Not something we could have helped. And we are going to be discussing the Thursday agenda, mainly the electoral legislation that has recently been passed and is now passed by the Parliament on Monday. Good night to everybody. Good night to my little son Sawyer, who is up and watching, and to all of you who are nice enough to join. Please share, if you're watching us on Facebook, please share the link so that others who may be interested may be able to join us. The first thing I wanted to raise with you, and I wanted to discuss, is the National Registration Amendment Bill. This is now the National Registration Amendment Act. It has been passed by Parliament on Monday, 5th December. And this is an act that provides for registration of voters. Now, there's been in Guyana, following every election since 1992 perhaps, or before 1992 it was happening, there's been election amendments being made in a very piecemeal way to address the difficulty of the most recent election. The difficulties would have arisen, and we would have passed laws immediately after those elections to address it. Those laws are located in pieces of legislation that, for those of us who were involved, who were engaged in election litigation, it's a nightmare. It's all over the place to find the applicable act and what is in force at the time, what has not been amended. So the government of Guyana and the Attorney General have decided to put all of these amendments into the respective legislation which they belong. So they either belong in the National Registration Act or in the Representation of the People Act. So they're one of the two places that they belong. And what you do is what these amendments that were passed seek to do, among other things, is to put the legislation back put them in the context in the respective pieces of legislation. There was one piece of legislation which is the Election Laws Amendment Bill in 2000, passed in 2000, a very important piece of legislation, and the legislation that in fact paves the way for much of what our current law is. But it's stated to be the Election Laws Amendment Act. When you usually have legislation, if I could explain, that says, and it has amendment in the name, it usually means there's a principal act. But the Election Laws Amendment Act, in fact, is a principal act because there is no principal act called Election Laws Act. So even that piece of legislation, substantial parts of it have been repealed or were repealed on Monday. And the other parts which are integral to our current electoral system were put into the Representation of the People Act or the Registration Act. So that gives you a little bit of the background. But the reality is this: when registration is embarked upon, it's really, most people use their ID cards. So you have to get registered to vote. And when you are registered, generally speaking, you get an ID card. Now you use it's your national ID card. So that really falls under the registrar of births and deaths, and that's a national ID card. National registers are kept But this piece of legislation provides very clearly that there should be a registrar for the purpose of the list, and making the list. But that registrar, by this law, in express terms, comes under the supervision, direction, and control of GCOM. So GCOM, he's answerable to GCOM. GCOM will be the entity that will continuously supervise and see what that registrar does. Now, bear in mind that Guyana has since 2008 been continuous registration, which means registration continues around the year. And by this act now, continuous registration now have periods. It used to be a little ad hoc. The law now is that registration periods are January to June and July to December. At the end of each period, a list is ready. Now, we don't have an election every 6 months, but there is a list effectively that is ready, valid from that date. Now, other laws provide that you have to have a list that is valid from a certain time. Now, this list can be used. So let me see if I can simplify that a little bit. Basically, what we want to be able to do is, like in most other parts of the world, if we decide today to have an election, we shouldn't have to go through these whole cycles again before we can have a list of electors. What we should do is we should be able to go all the time. And we should be able to go at short notice, and the president, in his discretion, should be allowed to call an election when he chooses. Now, in Guyana, that's been an impediment because we can't have the election right away. We saw that as an excuse when the government fell in 2018 as to why the elections couldn't be held right away. But now, with the continuous registration in the statute, what we're going to do is we're going to have these lists that are going to be valid at that time. So we're not going to have what happened in 2019 leading into the 2020 election when the government fell. We're not going to have that situation because every list is valid for 6 months. In that situation, you will recall that there was a local government elections list where it was valid in October. And therefore, the list would have been valid October, November, December, January, February, March. So it would have been valid up until the following year, up until March. But there was nothing, the ridiculous arguments arose about what was a majority, and the courts took longer than March to determine that very simple issue. As a result, by the time the CCJ had pronounced on it, the time had passed. And we needed to then get another list. And then we went through that whole nightmare of whether we go to house registration. When Patterson, the wrongly and illegally appointed chairman, he said he wanted house-to-house registration. These were the things that happened. That wouldn't happen now. This is why the law was amended. The continuous cycles that are ongoing is such that it will cause a list to be ready every 6 months. So we are always going to have an electoral list ready. It provides very clearly that the offices at which you go to get registered, these offices shall be publicly identified and they shall be gazetted so that everybody will know where the office is. And it is upon you to go and get yourself registered. Now, it also provides all the quarrel, the hullabaloo about dead people on the list, etc., which is not an issue. It really is not an issue. But even now, the law provides very specifically that the registrar of births and deaths shall send to the commissioner, who is doing the commissioner of the registration, on a basis, every person, every list that he gets. So he has the list of births and deaths in January, he will forward that to the commissioner. The list of births and deaths in February, he will forward that to the commissioner. So that in relation to the deaths, the commissioner can remove people who have been listed, who the registrar of births and deaths have listed as being dead, so that they could be removed from the list. Because that's the only way you could remove someone from the list, if there is some form of proof that the person is dead. Now, that is now statute. So we have a position and a provision that deals with that. Now, additionally, we have an issue that would relate to matters other than when how you could remove people from the list. Now, understand this. The removal of the list from the local registrar, the removal from the list by the local registrar is such that we can provide for that. There are Guyanese who are on the list who may be living outside of Guyana, and for that we have no direct mechanism to control another country. But if anybody is aware, any citizen is aware that someone has died and you have a death certificate, you can supply it to the commissioner, and he will take note of that. It will have to, of course, be verified, but that's why there are claims and objection periods. That's why those things exist. But one of the things that is cleared up by this Registration Act is that for everything that is relating to registration, everything that relates to registration relates to citizens of Guyana, and you have to go and get registered. Now, the citizens of Guyana are allowed to be registered, and you would go to the registration office, and at that registration office you will identify that this is who you are. You would usually produce your birth certificate, your ID cards. You will say, this is my address. What happens is your information is taken at the office, and then someone would usually go and verify the address. Now, the verification of the address is not verification of residency. Make sure that the distinction is understood. So they will go and check and see that 78 Hatfield Street exists, and that address is there. They don't have to come in and get proof that Tom Jones lives there. That's not what the law provides for. The law provides that you must say that this is your address. So you have the verification of the address is what is important. Now, the law in this regard is now settled. The vexed provisions about house to house, which, honestly speaking, is only asserted by those who want to create mischief. Those are the only people who are asserting the issues about house to house, because it was contained, and as I said at the beginning, the development of the law in Guyana has been piecemeal. After every election, all the horrors or the problems that were had is fixed by legislation. And then we continue. So we repeal pieces of legislation, we pass new pieces of legislation. Those who insist on house to house and saying it's in the law or in the Constitution are making reference to outdated pieces of law, outdated legislation. Legislation that has either been expressly repealed or impliedly repealed. That is the position. House-to-house registration was removed out of the laws in Guyana when we passed legislation to say there would be continuous registration. When we passed those laws, we were essentially saying, look, what we used to do at every election and what we grew up, those of us who are a little older will tell you, is whenever it came to election, you had to do house-to-house registration. That usually takes 2 years for you to get a voters list. Now, we passed laws in the early 2000s that says we shall have a system of continuous registration. And the law says the last house-to-house in 2008 shall be the benchmark. That shall be the piece of the last house-to-house, and that list is now going to be continuously updated. Now when that happens, and what that is designed to do is to move away from house to house and make it a continuous registration process so that we may move forward from that time in a more efficient way of registration. So that's what has happened, and everyone who is quoting to you laws that mention house to house, those laws have been repealed. But they will find it will suit their purpose in their duty that they see it as to mislead people to refer to that legislation. However, Section 9 of this amendment puts that vexed issue to bed. All the statutes that mention house-to-house registration, those statutes, insofar as it mentioned house-to-house, are now repealed. So as far as registration is concerned, remember the rules are you have to be a Guyanese citizen and you have to get on the voters list. That is all you need to vote in Guyana. There is no proxy of overseas voting. There is no postal voting, none of that applies in Guyana anymore. Registration is now a very straightforward and simple process. And once you've been registered on the list, they cannot remove you unless you've died. You have to understand, residency, there was a deliberate and considered position taken that residency is not a requirement. Maybe in the future, laws are going to be passed and Parliament may think it fit and the will of the people will be about we will have laws then. But we do not have laws now that require anyone to be resident. So you could be registered to vote and you could be overseas, and when the elections are here, you're on the list, you can come and vote. This is simple, plain English language. But this legislation seeks to put that position on a little more firm footing. It is clear the pieces of legislation that we needed to amend, that were amendments, we have put them into their correct places, so registration is settled. Now, for those of you who watched the absolutely insane circus of the 2020 elections, especially as it took place at Ashbin's building, when we had clear legal provisions being flouted by public officials and electoral officers, and when the clear letter of the law was being disobeyed, which caused Guyana to go down that path of 5 months, where A nation was on its knees because the public offices, the public officials in GCOM would not do their job. And they were trying to influence an election and thwart the will of the Guyanese people. Now, the Representation of the People Amendment Act deals with that situation. So, a simple part of it we will start with. When the election takes place, at the place of poll, all the people are given lists, all the scrutineers, all the party scrutineers, all the officers that work, the returning officer, the polling agent, poll clerk, they all have documents that are the list for that polling station. They have a folio which has the picture with the name of everybody that's on the list. They have ballot papers. They have a tabulation sheet, which is the statement of poll, so that they can write. All of this is given by the polling agent, the person who is there, the polling officer who is running that little polling station. So when that is done, what happened at the last election and elections before, we discovered, is they would say they have to get back all this information and all these sheets of paper, and they want to collect everything. We made it clear in law now that what they give out, the list, the folio with the pictures, the SOPs, shall always remain the property of the person it's given to, which includes the party scrutineers, the polling clerk, the polling agents. It remains their possession and their property. So no one can take it away now and say, I have to collect it. That is now the clear law. So that's the first hurdle. The next hurdle is, what happens with those statement of polls? The AFC have never produced their statement of polls. No doubt, because it does not reflect what they were trying to tell this country in 2020, and that is that they won the election. It does not reflect that. However, in the situation that exists now, what happens with those statement of polls? So this is what happens. It must be displayed at the place of poll. So it's usually nailed or stapled to the door outside of the polling station or on the wall. So that's where it would be. But the polling at the place of poll, there's a GCOM, there's the returning officer there who must take that SOP now and give it to the returning officer for the district that they're in. What happens to that is supposed to be conveyed to GCOM, to the CEO, and now to the chairman, to the commissioners. But what happens now, what is added with the laws, is that as soon as it's given to the returning officer in the district or the region, it has to be put onto the website for GCOM. It's a criminal offense if you post the wrong or incorrect statement of poll. So you can't fool the people by putting what you want. But the one you received, which will have everybody's signature, all the party scrutineers, must now be put online on a website for the whole world to see. This is what the results for this area is. It has to be published. Now, the CEO, lo and feel, all the 9 regions in Guyana, there were no problems. We all recall the problems were Region 4, District 4. He received statement of polls from all the returning officers across this region. And so he had copies of the statement of poll. He could have stopped the mayhem by disclosing all of them and says, look, this is what it was. He didn't do that. And he never to this day has he disclosed them. Now what does the law say? The new amendment says that that statement of poll that he receives, he must, as soon as he gets it, he must publish it online too. So the returning officers are required by law to make these statement of polls public. Now what about all of the mayhem that was caused by Mingo and the spreadsheets and the bed sheets? The law was clear. Section 84 of the Act was very clear. We heard today testimony of Justice Claudette Singh, where she said that the Deputy CEO, Ms. Myers, said to her that she understood the Chief Justice's ruling to be you could use the spreadsheets, you could use things other than the SOP. That was not the ruling, as Justice Claudette Singh said. She did not understand that to be the ruling. She thought it meant to SOPs. Everyone else who could read and write and understand English thought it meant that you had to use the SOPs. They persisted, they continued to persist in GCOM to not use the SOPs. They persisted in that course of action despite the clear law. So what does the amendment say? The amendment says that for Section 84, you must display electronically in the presence of all present who are entitled to be present now, counting agents, polling agents for the parties, and candidates. All the candidates are allowed to be present. And they are allowed to be present, and you should use an electronic means and display it to everyone in the room, statement to poll by statement to poll, which in fact was being done initially in the Ashman's building. It was only when after some time had gone that they started to do other things. And they wanted to use a spreadsheet, and then they made it worse by displaying things on a bed sheet in bright sunlight, a GCOM building that no one could read. But the law, this is why the laws had to be amended. This is what the amendment does. It doesn't protect one political party or one side of the political divide. It protects every citizen. So the law now says very clearly that he has to display it. Whoever is the returning officer must display it so that everyone can see it. And he cannot move on to the next one and the next one when persons who are there have queries and persons who are there are asking questions, or when their SOPs or their data don't match what is being displayed. He must stop and he must resolve that issue. Now, what was one of the things that happened in 2020 is they just kept going on quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. Mingo and company did not care if queries were made. They did not care if questions were raised. How did you get those numbers on those spreadsheets? Where are the SOPs you received? He would not produce them. It's rather comical if it wasn't so serious. Think about it. The law says that you must tabulate the SOPs, and you must do so in the presence of the party scrutineers and the candidates. But you don't want to do that. So you say, I took the SOP numbers and I write it down on this spreadsheet. Why go to all that headache? You give yourself 2 twice the work. You really think that Mingo and company wanted to work any harder than they were? Or wanted more work? No, that couldn't be so. But what did they do? The law said that they had to count, tabulate. Tabulate means add up all the SOP's numbers onto one sheet. That was his job. And he had to do it by using the SOPs. He refused to use the SOPs and he insisted on using a spreadsheet. Now what does the law say? The law says the returning officer, first thing he must do, he must put it on the website. Second thing he must do is he must count it, he must display it in the room when he's doing the tabulation so that everybody can see. Third thing he must do, he can't flick through at his own pace to suit himself. He must take into consideration queries that are raised. The law says that this is what he must do now. This is what the amendment does. And if he doesn't do it, he's subject to jail term and a fine. So this is what Guyana has come to. This is what we're forced to resolve the issue. Because clearly, the clear words that said you had to tabulate from the SOPs apparently didn't make sense to people. And it was openly subverted. The law was clear. There was no reason for you to read those words, and there was no rational way you could arrive at another conclusion. But in an effort to make sure that never happens in this country again, what it is go display it on a website, then display it in front of everyone, and let everyone agree this is it, move on to the next. This is it, move on to the next. No, I don't have this. You look at what document they're saying they have, you look into what, so you can't be frivolous as well. You can't come with a spreadsheet when the returning officer is looking at the SOP and have your own spreadsheet and say this is it. The law doesn't mean that you got to tolerate that. Because otherwise, people would make up their own spreadsheet and walk in and say, well, look, the law says this. The law doesn't say that. The law says queries must be addressed. Now, if you come in with your own spreadsheet and you want to tell the returning officer what his numbers should be, then why should anybody pay attention to you in those circumstances, man? Bring your SOP. Show the signatures of everybody that was in the polling station. All the scrutineers from both sides, so you can't fix it later. All the scrutineers, all the GCOM staff. Easy. You bring it, you say, look, everybody signed to these numbers. How did you get those? Now that's a valid query. So you can't make up your own spreadsheet and come into place and say this is it. So three things are done, and the law brings in three things in an effort to bring those things to an end. So that's the first thing. The next thing now is what happens is in an effort to not concentrate where the large number or large numbers of ballots are counted, as with Region 4, when the whole nation was held to ransom because it was at Ashwin's building all of it. So now in Region 4 has 4 districts: East Bank, North Georgetown, South Georgetown, and East Coast. Big areas. Largest part of the electorate in Guyana. So what happens now is there will be 4 stations. There will be East Bank, North Georgetown, South Georgetown, East Coast. Everybody is not going to go, and each one will have its own returning officer, effectively. So, for want of a better word, we will have 4 like Mingo. Hopefully not 4 literally like Mingo, but in the same office. So we will have 4 people at 4 different centers in Region 4. in a manner to simply say that it is not done to affect one political party, because that is the complaint by the opposition, that they are stronger in Georgetown. Why do you have to change the system? Entirely nonsensical argument, absolutely without any merit, but in an effort to simply go to the length to appease. Region 6 also does not have one counting state where the returning officer will be. It's divided again. And Region 3 is also divided, I believe, into 3 areas. So what happens in those areas is, instead of it all being concentrated into one place with one returning officer, they'll have multiple returning officers at different locations, in the locations themselves. So that hopefully will mean that in a big concentration of where a large number of ballots are, where someone will feel, look, never mind the other 9 regions were fair, I can cheat here and win the entire country. So what you try to do is to divide up those stations. So that was the effect. That is now part of our law. Now, another part of the law was that you had to do a tabulation. So how it works is, in every polling station, you count the polls, you produce an SOP. Then all the SOPs will go to the person in charge of the district, or in the places of Region 4, 6, and 3, the sub-district goes to a returning officer. All those returning officers are supposed to do is tabulate those SOPs. How much did the PPPC get, how much ANOC get, and tabulate it onto one sheet, and then read it out to declare that this is what happened. When that's done from the various returning officers, they then go and deliver that to the CEO of GCOM. So he will get from the regions now, it was 10 sheets he used to get. Now he'll get a little bit more than 10, because Region 4 will have 4, Region 6 and Region 3 I think will have 3 each. So each one of the returning officers in the district will deliver. But they also have to make public what their tabulated results are. They have to publish it on the website. And they all give it to the chairman of GCOM, who must, within 12 hours, he must tabulate and put it on the website and announce it. Now, that was done because, despite the recount, despite the clear thing, the recount of the whole country, despite the 10 sheets for tabulation that the last CEO, Mr. Lowenfield, had, that all he had to do is tabulate the sheets. No other job. As the saying goes, he had one job. He then took it upon himself to say he would decide on valid votes. If it weren't so serious, it would be funny. It is obvious that the valid votes are the only ones that were counted. You don't count invalid votes, you only count valid votes. You don't need to say that. But he went to the court to say that he was to count valid votes. It went all the way to the CCJ, and we know how that ended. It obviously meant valid votes. But he now said and declared a list. He declared his own result where he discounted ballot boxes and votes as he chose, in his own arbitrary manner. He had no lawful authority to do that. He received no complaint that that was the case, because he was not authorized to receive any complaint. He didn't hold a hearing with anyone so that both sides could be heard before you take away a man's vote and discard it. There was no opportunity to be heard because he was no tribunal. He couldn't conduct a hearing. He had no power to do anything other than sit add the numbers and tell everybody what it was. The simplest of things. My 4-year-old son saw I could do that. But he chose another route. So he discarded a set of, and he declared APNU AFC to have won a massive landslide victory, which nobody believed. Nobody took it seriously. Everybody knew that that was fraudulent. So he was then sent back, and he declared a whole other list of numbers with a whole other methodology. All he had was one job: add the damn sheets together. This is it. Tabulate from the 10 regions. It was 10 pieces of paper, ladies and gentlemen. 10 pieces of paper. He had to total the numbers. He took more than 3 weeks to do that. And he did it wrong twice. Can you imagine that? In clear law. So what has happened is the amendment now says, before it gets to him, the 10 regions have all got, the returning officers have all got to display on GCOM's website their results, their tabulated results, and he must now do the addition of the regions. That's what the new the role of the chief elections officer will be, to tabulate those results. He has 12 hours to do it before he says, this is my tabulated result. GCOM will then meet and declare the results. So, but he only has, again, 12 hours. Not 3-4 weeks where we sit down and we decide, is he going to do his job today? And then he comes with some flippant thing and we adjourn for 5 more days and for 6 more days while we figure out what's going on. And he's deciding, well, oh, I didn't see this and I'm not satisfied with this. The self-importance that he attributed to himself, he never had. And he fully well know that. He gave interviews before which said that he acted on the instructions of the commission. Now, he fully well know he didn't have these authorities. He had no authority to do these things, to embark on his own self-aggrandizement and made himself more important than he actually was. His job was a simple job. Punch the numbers and do it. He didn't do that, right? But, ladies and gentlemen, the good side of it is this is why we amended the law. Not only at every stage from statement to poll forward, they have to be publicly displayed. Every officer now has a duty to do his job in a certain express way within a certain time. If he does not and he fails to do that, then most of the penalties are a fine of $10 million and 3 years imprisonment. Now, on the last election, believe it or not, to get a recount, you had to have a counting agent appointed for the party. Strangely enough, the appointment of the counting agent was part of what the CEO confirmed. These are the counting agents. At the last election, I recall that I was busy calling all the other political parties and their members, their leaders, everyone, to find out whether they had received confirmation that they had an appointed counting agent or whether they had appointed a counting agent. No one had. Not a single political party in Guyana had a counting agent. So, what was to happen then? How do you ask for a recount? Thankfully, there was the intervention of Prime Minister Motley, and through dialogue with the Dr. Jagdeo and then President Granger, they agreed on a recount, and that's how we came to have a recount. But the request for a recount now is a simpler process. Counting agent can request it, or any candidate. So whether GCOM slows the process down and doesn't send you back, and it's a very busy time for all the political parties, so you might forget to check, and it appears that everybody were unable to get GCOM to give them the relevant notification that was required, or to provide the information to get it. It was one of those two. What happened? Now any candidate can go and request that a recount be had, and in the first instance that he makes a request, it shall be granted. Now what he has to do, whenever the results for that district, that area, that region, whether it's region 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, whenever it is declared, by 12 midday the following day. So if it is declared at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, by 12 the following day, the request must be made. Now, on the last occasion, Mingo couldn't be found, the CEO couldn't be found, people weren't being let into GCOM building to find out where people were. So you're supposed to, the law requires that you gave it to the returning officer. Now, in effect, that returning officer, as happened in 2015, can hide from you. And then what do? Your rights, the rights of the citizens, are defeated because there is one public official who decides to hide from being served with the notice. So that has changed. The law now changes that to be served on the returning officer, served on the CEO, the deputy CEO, the chairman of GCOM. There are many avenues placed on that, and it's served at GCOM headquarters. So these matters have been put into law now to better protect the Guyanese people all around, to make sure that public officials are held accountable. These penalties are much more severe penalties. So why was this legislation important on Monday? It is important because our election landscape is now changed. We now have very clear rules as to what happened, and we can't have people saying, well, oh, they could do this and they could do that. The laws have been set out in greater detail, and the penalties are also in great detail. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is a safe bet that the election landscape, as far as the laws are concerned, is in a much better place than it was now that these laws have been passed. So a lot of it is born out of the frustration and hardship at the last election. But it is now hopefully been resolved, and no one will take it upon themselves to try to do the foolish things. And that circus of magicians who were producing numbers out of a hat, hopefully we no longer have that going. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always for joining me for this period. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for staying with me for this hour where we've gone through some of the laws that we have, and I hope that I've done a little bit in explaining it to you and conveying to you how the amendments will take effect and how it will make your lives hopefully a little better and a little less hardship down the road. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always. Good night, and may your God be with you.